I don't really know what to say here. I don't know what to say to her.
For years, she had silently borne the tension and confronted the many complexities of life in a plural family. Every decision, every word, every action was considered, not just by Kody, but by the whole family. The strain on her to maintain peace and harmony without losing her sense of self had been building over the years, and she knew that there would come a moment when she could no longer keep quiet. That moment came one evening in Flagstaff during a conversation that fans worldwide would later refer to as the viral moment. It was simply a question, one that many in the family had asked before, but not in that kind of tone. Tired of watching decisions get made about and for everyone without her input, Janelle leaned in and asked Kody why certain choices had been made, choices she thought undermined her authority both as a mother and a wife. Kody, as he does often, responded with a mix of defensiveness and rationalization, trying to justify every action as being necessary for the family's well-being. But Janelle wasn't buying it this time. Her eyes, equal parts hurt and resolved, locked onto Kody's, signaling that this conversation would be different from all the ones before. The discussion intensified with each example Janelle pointed out. She recalled times when decisions were made without her inclusion, times when her voice was merely weakened or just plain not heard. She spoke clearly, concisely, and with feeling about how the lack of transparency and communication had chipped away at trust over the years. Each one of her points was long thought out. She knew confrontation in the absence of preparation would only lead to easy deflection. But Janelle was prepared to expose patterns she had endured in silence for far too long. Kody's initial responses were a blend of denial and annoyance. He tried to turn the conversation around, like she must have misunderstood him or was overreacting to the situation. But Janelle had expected these responses. She remained calm, steady, and resolute, and would not allow his defensiveness to push her off track. Her delivery was firm but not accusatory. She stuck with the facts, the times, the moments, and emotions of experiences she had endured, and let the weight of the words speak their own volumes. As the conversation deepened, the tension in the room thickened. The rest of the family members were close by and knew this conversation could alter the dynamics forever. Some attempted to subtly intervene with mediating comments and diffuse the intensity, but Janelle insisted on speaking her truth directly to Kody. It wasn't that she was confrontational, it was more that she was angry and in deep need of accountability, clarity, and fairness within the family structure. Janelle's confrontation brought several layers to the table concerning their family dynamics. It brought up balancing personal individuality against family expectation, co-parenting amidst plural marriage, and the frustrations of remaining consistently unheard. For audiences worldwide, it was a heart-stopping moment because this was what showed the vulnerability, bravery, and frustration that built up throughout the years. The exchange was raw, real, and unfiltered, elements that audiences around the world would soon witness when clips would go viral. By the time this first leg of the confrontation was done, there was little chance that this evening would end without a breakthrough. Janelle had made her position very clear. She was in want of recognition, transparency, and respect. Kody, taken into the storm of her words, had to weigh what had gone on due to his actions and the patterns that led to this explosive conversation. The stakes couldn't get any higher, not only for their relationship, but for the whole dynamics that had long relied on a fragile balance. As the night wore on, the conversation only grew more heated. Janelle continued to push, bringing up various examples of times in the past when she had been belittled or mischaracterized. Each one chipped away at the veneer of family harmony to which Kody had clung so tightly. The tension was palpable, but a sense of inevitability hung in the air. It was a long overdue reclaiming of voice and agency for Janelle's place within the family. For Kody, it served as a wake-up call that the dynamics he depended on could no longer survive. It was this first part that set the stage for the viral moment that captured the attention of millions. It wasn't about confrontation, it was about truth, accountability, and finally finding the courage to stand up against a system that had for so long restrained her. As viewers would soon see, Janelle's words carried power, her presence demanded attention, and a willingness to confront realities regarding her family situation resonated far beyond the walls of that room. The tension in the room after the intensity of that first confrontation did not break. It intensified. Janelle had opened up a door that could never again be shut, and the family had to face uncomfortable truths long ignored. Kody, who at times controlled via subtle manipulations and quiet command, found himself in an unusual position, on the defense. He did his best to justify former decisions, using what he thought would be for the greater good. But Janelle was prepared for every excuse, every possible deflection he made. She responded with specifics, memories too clear and undeniable to possibly misremember. Moments when those choices directly touched her children, her autonomy, and her sense of worth in the family. The more the discussion flowed, the more Christine listened from a distance, her silence a testament to the understanding that she knew very well how Janelle felt. She had seen these patterns over the years and gave some kind of silent support that seemed to reassure Janelle that at least someone did believe her. For years, subtle power dynamics had been at play, and women in the family worked their way through a world where their voices were always secondary. This was the turning point, not just in Janelle's life, but in the family structure altogether. Kody tried to steer the conversation, placing the focus on logistical issues, money, decisions about property, and the complex relationships that needed tending. However, Janelle refused to be sidetracked by such superficial matters. She spoke about the lack of transparency, the emotional manipulation, and how there was a routine in the way decisions were made, one in which her opinions were never taken into consideration. She explained how this set of patterns was impacting not just her own sense of autonomy, but also the emotional lives of their children. Every one of these points she brought up was thoughtful, well-framed, and could not be overlooked. The intensity of the conversation started to have an effect on the children, too. Some retreated quietly, sensing the growing tension, but unsure how to intervene, while others stayed close, drawn by the honesty and courage they were witnessing. It soon became evident that this was not a fight between spouses, but a family moment that would ripple through generations. Perhaps for the first time, the kids realized that it was okay to stand up for oneself against a system that had long seemed inflexible and immovable. Throughout the evening, Kody's responses transitioned from being on defense. Now he started revealing crack after crack in his composure. Layers of control, relied upon to this day, are being peeled off layer by Janelle in pursuit of the truth. The conversation made him reflect on patterns he had ignored for so long, which had allowed tension, resentment, and accumulation of silence to build up over years. Still trying to assert his authority at times, the weight of Janelle's words was making it hard to hold on to that stance. Meanwhile, Janelle did not refrain from discussing her own vulnerabilities. She spoke candidly about the emotional toll of years spent feeling unheard, the isolation of navigating decisions that affected her whole family, and the personal cost of suppressing her voice for the sake of harmony. This resonated deeply, not only in the family members present, but with anyone who later saw this moment on camera. The raw emotion with clear articulation of experiences made her words both powerful and relatable. The future was the direction the discussion took. Janelle said the status quo was unacceptable, adding that a decision going forward would have to be made together, including her voice being heard and valued. She called for accountability, transparency, and fairness, with Kody taking responsibility for his past actions and pledging to make positive, lasting change. Given the gravity of what she asked for, there was no doubt that this would not simply pass as an argument, but be considered a point in which the fate of this family would be decided for years to come. The tension had reached a critical peak. Kody, though still trying to speak his mind, was faced with the absolute truth in the claims of Janelle. The emotional dynamics within this family had shifted irreversibly. It is here that Janelle's courage and determination set the stage for the succeeding moments of reckoning, confrontation, and ultimately transformation. The evening closed on a charged silence. Every member of the family, from active participants to quiet onlookers, knew this confrontation had been a point of no return. The dynamics which had long defined their relations had been irrevocably breached. Janelle's voice, once subdued, now held authority, clarity, and undeniable truth. But as the immediate conversation was at an end, the full implications of her confrontation were just beginning to unfold. The morning after the confrontation, the Brown home was different. An eerie silence filled the air, disturbed only by the faint sounds of activity, footsteps on wooden floors, the far hum of voices, and the creak of a door. It had been a night of revelations, and each person carried with him a sense of tension that flows from unspoken truth. Janelle, more determined than ever before, approached her day with purpose. She knew that this confrontation had at most been the beginning, not the end, and that the real work, exposing the underlying issues and ensuring lasting change, still remained to be done. Christine, ever the quiet observer, had spent the night reflecting on what had transpired. She knew all too well the balance that must be struck to navigate the complex web of relationships in the family. For years, she had watched patterns of control and manipulation unfold, often feeling powerless to intervene. But now that Janelle had made her bold step, Christine saw an opportunity to stand with and support her sister wife in ways that could actually change the family dynamics. Her plan was not born out of conflict, but of strategy, empathy, and a shared desire to protect their children and preserve the integrity of their voices within the family structure. Kody, however, was trying to wrap his head around the confrontation being far heavier than he was used to. The defensiveness that had once protected him well was no good against the specific, consistent complaints articulated by Janelle. For the first time in years, he found himself contemplating his decisions of the past, whether the control he had exercised had truly been in the best interest of the family or simply a means to assert authority. The realization was uncomfortable, even terrifying, and one that demanded he revisit the bedrock his relationships were founded upon. The children felt the change in energy and began to process what it could mean in their individual ways. Some felt a surge of hope, recognizing that their voices just might be heard and their parents were actually capable of confronting difficult truths. Others worried about what the fights were going to mean for their own routines, stability, and family. The shift was shaking everything in the family, and everybody felt its subtle tremors. It was a time of transition, introspection, and cautious expectation. As the day wore on, the conversations between Janelle and Christine became increasingly strategic. They began to map out ways to address long-standing grievances and ensure their perspective was no longer marginalized. The conversations were detailed, methodical, and increasingly concrete about outcomes rather than abstract complaints. Every example they reviewed, every incident they could recall, was meticulously documented, not just for personal validation, but as evidence of systemic issues that required acknowledgement and resolution. Meanwhile, Kody tried to regain some degree of control by suggesting logistical discussions about the household, financial decisions, and schedules. But Janelle and Christine would not be sidetracked by superficial issues. They turned every topic to accountability, transparency, and fairness. They reiterated how the patterns of the past had always favored Kody's unilateral decisions at the cost of their autonomy and the emotional well-being of the children. Every point they raised was to make sure that there could not be any misunderstanding or disregard for the facts. The extended family network also started to respond. Relatives, extended family members who had been witnesses to the Brown household drama for years, started calling, some cautiously, others supportively. Friends and acquaintances who had known how tense it had been gave advice, confirmation, and even criticism. The ripples from the confrontation continued to spread well beyond the close family to impact perception and relationships in the wider community. Well into the afternoon, aftershocks from the confrontation rippled through in small yet significant ways. Interactions among family members, previously predictable, were now tinged with an underlying current of acknowledgement and introspection. The kids were pushing limits, testing new boundaries as the family dynamic began to shift. Kody, still attempting to assert his control, could not deny that a sense of group consciousness was building among the family members. His every decision and comment was being filtered in light of Janelle's rebellion and Christine's mute solidarity. As the evening wore on, Janelle and Kody had a very serious discussion. It stopped being a mere confrontation and became a serious negotiation. Janelle was firm and articulate in stating her demands for the future. Certain things could no longer go on. Kody was more and more aware of the seriousness of it all and began to reply with circumvented acknowledgement. The conversation was tense. It was a mix of frustration with tentative steps towards comprehension. Every word counted, every pause a signal of reflections weighing in, and each decision a promise of possible permanent change or more conflict. With the combination of tension and cautious optimism, the day came to a close. While this confrontation had opened a doorway to honest dialogue, self-reflection, and potential reconciliation, it also tested those indelible power structures. The future was one in which all members were conscious of the need for change, yet also conscious that the mistakes of the past could no longer be ignored. Janelle's courage, along with Christine's strategic support, created a turning point that would affect every interaction, decision, and relationship that would take place under the household roof from that day on. The morning after, the Brown household was quiet, the silence almost tangible. After the intensity of the previous day, each family member was left to process in their own way. Not so with Janelle, however. She knew that one confrontation could not transform years of entrenched patterns. Lasting transformation required persistence, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Every step she took from now on was guided by a premeditated plan that the voices of the wives, and especially her own, would no longer be minimized or ignored. Christine watched from a distance, her mind racing between caution and determination. She knew about the importance of timing, that to push too hard would raise defenses and stall movement. So she orchestrated gentle interventions, moments of conversation, soft prodding questions, and reflections shared with the children to create the atmosphere in which accountability might finally germinate. Her manner was patient, calculated, and profoundly empathetic. She was constantly aware of the fragile emotional landscape within the family. Kody was stuck in a reality where, for the first time, his authority was constantly challenged. Trying to dominate through put-downs or deflection was less and less effective. Every act of resistance by Janelle and Christine eroded the structures to which he had clung for security. He slowly realized that what had worked for so many years was no longer working for him today to keep himself on top. The energy shift was palpable and required contemplation, change, and some very uncomfortable self-reflections regarding his leadership, priorities, and relationships. The children could feel the tension and change and began to test new boundaries. For some, there was an emboldening spirit from their mother's courage. They could voice thoughts, feelings, and opinions they hadn't been able to assert before. Yet others were anxious, observant of the changes in dynamics that continued to affect their everyday lives, routines, and sense of stability. Every interaction, no matter how minor, now reflected the emerging dynamics of the changed family hierarchy. Real-time lessons in empathy, communication, and accountability were being learned, oftentimes observed rather than instructed. As the day wore on, conversations between Janelle and Christine grew increasingly strategic. They replayed prior interactions with Kody, pointing out the cyclical patterns of manipulation, control, and avoidance that were occurring. Each was carefully pulled apart, not simply to understand what had happened, but why it had happened, and how it, constructively, be dealt with. The discussions were precise and orderly, with attention to actionable outcomes that would help slowly bring balance and equity back into the household. Meanwhile, Kody tried to shift the focus to logistical issues, how the households were being run, financial decisions, and scheduling. But Janelle and Christine would not budge, setting the bigger picture before him: accountability. They circled every topic back to the main complaints, emphasizing how his decisions, long-term, would affect their autonomy, emotional well-being, and the overall cohesion of the family. They weren't looking at surface compromises anymore. They wanted systemic change. Extended family and friends started to notice subtle changes. People who had been bystanders in the past now had something to say, some words of encouragement, others with words of skepticism or condemnation. The ripples from Janelle's confrontation were moving beyond the household and into a broader circle of awareness and inquiry. Every virtual and in-person interaction added to a growing sense that the Brown family dynamics were under a microscope. As the afternoon wore on, the concrete actions began. Janelle and Christine started to draft plans, set boundaries, and think about what kinds of interventions might be put into place to prevent minor conflicts in the future. They also strategized about how to communicate, how to make sure their voices were being heard, how to shield the children from emotional spillover, and how to establish new models for openness and fairness. Every step was carefully weighed, balancing the requirements of assertion with the necessity for careful negotiation to avoid unnecessary confrontation. Kody's efforts to control became more and more strained. Every move he made seemed to be expected, disputed, or reinterpreted by Janelle and Christine. The contrast between former authority and current accountability couldn't have been much sharper. It was obvious that the balance of this family was shifting and that the old systems of unilateral decision-making would no longer be applicable. A turning point came as night began to fall. Janelle asked for a private talk with Kody, one that would delve deeper than surface conversation and confront him with his past actions. It was a tense, emotional, and revelatory discussion. For the first time in many years, Kody was confronted with a comprehensive, unfiltered view of the consequences of his decisions. Janelle spoke not only of her own experiences, but of the emotional impact on Christine, the other wives, and the children. The conversation ended with an uneasy truce, acknowledgement without resolution, promises without guarantees. Yet it marked a turning point. Undeniably, the dynamics had now shifted, and each side knew that the future would continue to require vigilance, strategic action, and honesty. It was on these grounds that long-term change could be modeled, but just what form that would take remained uncertain, contingent upon the next series of choices each family member would make. As the weight of that day settled into night, the tension, reflection, and strategy would carry forward into the days to come, influencing decisions, interactions, and relationships in ways both visible and subtle. The Brown family had entered a period of reckoning, one that promised transformation and conflict, with the potential for a new chapter, if they were willing to confront the truths so long hidden below the surface. The Brown household was therefore extremely expectant the following morning. Each member could feel that all that had happened in the past few days had already set the stage for a moment of truth. Janelle and Christine, having prepared for months, were now ready to take the strategy to the next level. Their aim was clear: to force an accounting, to reveal the long-kept secrets, and to regain some of their autonomy within the family circle that had taken their voices for granted for so long. Meanwhile, Kody increasingly knew that control for him was tenuous. His various methods of deflection, charm, or subtle intimidation were no longer working. The women's unified approach, patience, timing, and steadfast assertiveness had created an environment where his past actions could no longer remain hidden. Every interaction, every conversation seemed to chip away at the authority he had maintained with such great care for years. As the day wore on, the family came together for what was supposed to be a normal discussion of household logistics. The room was awash in silent tension, however. Janelle initiated the discussion, carefully selecting a topic: accountability. Her words were straightforward, uncompromising, and bolstered by specific, detailed examples of actions and consequences that had occurred in the past. Christine reinforced her points by adding clarity, context, and emotional depth that Kody could not ignore. The children watched in silence, some with curiosity, others with apprehension. They could feel the shift in power dynamics, the emerging strength of their mothers, and the unfolding reality that the structure within their family would no longer be the same. Their reactions, small as they were, spoke volumes for the internalization of lessons about boundaries, courage, and the importance of speaking truth to authority. Kody became defensive and gained insight in return. For the first time, he was confronted not just with individual grievances, but with a comprehensive narrative that exposed patterns of manipulation, favoritism, and control. Each example presented thoughtfully showed how different his perceptions were from the lived experiences of his family. As the confrontation between these numbers intensified, there were growing influences from outside the household. Extended family, friends, and even external advisors weighed in, some supporting the women's position, others cautioning restraint. Social media chatter amplified the situation, creating additional pressure as the story of the family's internal struggle began to leak beyond private conversations. Things came to a head when Janelle produced documented proof, messages, financial records, and testimony from the children directly contradicting Kody's narrative. The room fell into stunned silence. The weight of undeniable proof made evasion impossible, and for the first time, Kody faced a situation where denial was futile. Christine stepped forward with a bold proposal, a structured plan for accountability, a restructuring of family dynamics. She had a plan of boundaries, decision-making protocols, measures that made sure transparency and fairness were maintained. It was a blueprint for transformation, one that would fundamentally alter how this family functioned. Kody was hesitating, knowing full well that agreeing to such a plan meant giving up areas in the household that he had always dominated. Saying no would risk fracturing the family further, alienating the children, and airing private matters in public. The stakes were higher than ever, the pressure coming from all directions. As the meeting was wrapping up, Janelle and Christine provided Kody with a choice: accept the plan and start down a road to reconciliation and equity, or dig in and suffer the repercussions of continued dispute. A heavy sense of the weight of the decision hung in the air. Every member of the family, including Kody himself, knew that what comes next would define their relationships for years to come. Night descended, and an uneasy silence fell upon the household. Still, the story was not over yet. Behind closed doors, whispers of secrets, hidden evidence, and potential alliances alluded to further revelations that would be disclosed. Many questions still lingered. Would Kody take responsibility? Is it possible to reestablish trust within the family? Are there more secrets in store that will break the already fragile balance even more? The moments ticked toward an uncertain future. It was evident, as the Brown family confronted this critical juncture, that the next chapter would prove even more explosive than the last. And just as the night seemed to calm, a shocking revelation was about to emerge, one that could change everything the family thought they knew about each other.